today. We've got folks who are coming into the Zoom space, and so we want to give them a minute to get settled, get their audio where it needs to be, which I know can sometimes take a minute or two. So we will give folks that opportunity. And yes, that's correct. And we've got folks who will be responding directly in the chat. But folks will have an opportunity to engage today through both the Q&A and the chat feature. But you don't need to worry about your cameras or your microphones during today's webinar. I love these Zoom webinars and sort of the starting point of them. It always reminds me of making popcorn in a microwave, because it says to like cook for a certain amount of time and like wait for some number of kernels to stop popping, but it's always like you're getting ready to stop it and then like 5 kernels pop. You're like, okay, I'll give it a few more seconds, and then you're like ready to start, and then another 5 kernels pop. I feel that way about people entering a Zoom space. So there's like it's more of an art, I think, than a science, as to exactly when to start. But it is 2:33, and so we will go ahead and get started. And again, hopefully, if folks are coming in a little bit late, they will catch up and be able to join us once they get going. So first of all, welcome. We are so glad you are here. Thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Aaron Bockenheimer, and I serve as the Executive Director for Student Development and Campus Partnerships here at UNC Chapel Hill in the Office of the Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs. And we are really happy to have you with us today for navigating mental health through life's changes. I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping to get us started, and then I'm going to introduce our speaker for today, and then we will get going. In terms of expectations for today and what we're looking forward to, today's session is really going to dive into some of the challenges posed by change, from embarking on new academic pursuits to navigating shifts in identity and life's phases. Dr. Fruworth, who's here with us today, will offer insights gleaned from her team's research on COVID-19's mental health impacts on college students, and will share some effective strategies to foster resilience and well-being, even during life's tumultuous times. We are going to have a couple of options for people to engage today. Dr. Fruworth will talk a little bit more about some of the strategies that she's going to employ, including, I think, some polling, probably throughout today's talk. But you can also submit questions. We will have a Q&A time at the end of the presentation, so you can use the Q&A feature within Zoom to submit questions. If there's a question that you really like, you can upvote that question. You can also use the chat feature, as folks have been doing. If you're having any kind of issues with the Zoom itself, please drop those in the chat. Or if you just want to comment throughout the presentation, you can comment and respond using the chat feature as well. So please feel free to do that. We are recording this session, and it will be shared afterwards at care.unc.edu. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker today. So with us is Dr. Jane Cooley Fruworth. Dr. Fruworth is a professor in microeconomics here at UNC Chapel Hill, who studies the determinants of mental health among adolescents and college students. Dr. Fruworth received her PhD from right down the road at Duke University in 2006. Before joining the faculty here at Carolina, she was an assistant professor of economics at the University of Wisconsin, an associate professor at the University of Cambridge, and a fellow at Christ College. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Fruworth to our webinar today. And Jane, take it away.
Thank you so much, Erin, for the introduction and for the invitation to be here. I'm so excited to share with you some of what my team has learned in the past few years, and also through some interactions, hopefully learned from you as well, through some polls and through some interactions with the chat. So thank you so much for being here. Let me share my slides before I try to say too much. Can you let me know that you can see the slides? Erin, can you give me a thumbs up? All right, thank you so much. All right, so as Erin said, I'm a professor of economics, so you might wonder what a professor of economics is doing talking to you about mental health. My research has traditionally been in the area of education policy, so I've always been passionate about what schools can do to improve outcomes for young people, and particularly thinking about K-12 and the K-12 setting. But increasingly over my many years of being a college professor, I don't want to age myself, so I won't tell you how many, but over those years, I've seen increasingly students coming to me with mental health challenges that were inhibiting their ability to perform well in class. And we care about mental health challenges for many reasons, not just for that reason. But that became very alarming to me, that I wanted to know what was going on, how we could better support students. Was there something about the academic environment that was increasingly not supportive of students and developing their fullest potential, their well-being, their mental health, and their academic success? And so I was really coming to this question from that angle. I'll share more about my research team as we go along, but I've also been very conscious that I am an economist, and so I've been eager to make this multidisciplinary work. One of my key collaborators is Krista Pereira in the School of Social Medicine. She really helped me develop many of these ideas. And then I've worked with many amazing teams of undergraduate students, because I knew I couldn't. One of the fascinating things to me about developing this topic about understanding mental health during transitions was that I really thought I could learn from college students. And to the college students that are here today, I can't see you, but I am guessing there are many of you out there. I'm looking forward to learning from you and people in other roles at the university and your experiences. But the particular goal that we had was to understand this very pivotal time of when students come to college and the challenge during the transition to college, because we all know that when you start college, there are a lot of factors that come into play, so that you have a new academic environment, you have a new social environment, you're navigating like being away from home for the first time, and that can be more or less challenging for different people. And as I began to look into the research, I wanted to be able to say more about what was the magnitude of these different kinds of stressors that students were experiencing, what were sports, what was lacking. And so what I have to share with you today is some early evidence from a pilot I was doing at UNC Chapel Hill. So I'm hoping you'll find it interesting. So just to motivate this topic a little bit, I feel like these days, when I started this research, I had to do a lot more to motivate the importance of mental health symptoms. But I feel like these days, it really is at the forefront. And I think that's good, because I think there's a lot we can learn and a lot we need to do to improve the situation. But just to throw one of the statistics out there, you can read some of the other ones on my slide. I mean, mental health is a problem globally. 1 in 17 to 19-year-olds experience a mental health disorder. So it's not just the United States. I think we're probably more familiar about what's going on in the United States, where we see that even before the pandemic, rates of major depressive episodes were rising. But then the pandemic hits, and a lot of the evidence is suggesting that it's getting even worse. And so what's causing this rise? And that's something that's still an open question. And I think colleges are really working to do things about it. And I'm excited about those innovations, and I hope at the end to bring in some of your insights about what more you think we could do as a college, especially given different evidence that I shared today. Another surprising statistic to me, I was only able to find one statistic out there that compared college students to non-college students. And it's outdated at this point, but in a study in 2008 showed that college students face similar rates of mental illness to non-college attending peers. And one piece I had been curious about in that is, do colleges contribute, or something about the transition? Does it make, does it lead to worsening mental health? Something we don't know in the literature because of lack of data is, how does mental health change for students over time? And that's something that I've been working towards in this project with my research team. But in a way, if you think about it, it's really shocking that college students would face similar rates of mental illness to non-college attending peers, because mental illness is persistent over time. Many of it shows a lot of it shows up in adolescence. And so we can think that these students have been struggling previously. And so if anything, who is getting into college is slightly better, at least as a starting point in terms of their mental health, than students who don't get into college, because it would have been reflected on previous transcripts. And so it suggests that maybe there is something about college that could be worsening mental health. But again, it's an open question. I just was surprised that how that played out, that it wasn't better for college students relative to non-college students. And we do know that transitions are challenging, like the new academic challenges, new social contexts, new freedoms. What do we do with that? And I wanted to give you a particular model that's out there for thinking about those challenges that I thought we could use to frame our discussions a little bit around what could be done, or different ways of approaching challenges with mental health during transition. So this is a model that's attributed to Perlin and Bierman, sociologists. Later, I'm going to talk to you about a model that might provide an economic perspective on this. But basically, in this model, we have this sense that we want to know what's affecting mental health during the transition to college. And one big factor we want to think about is stressors, right? That college stressors might contribute. So there might be academic stressors, there might be financial stressors, there might be trouble with work. When I talk to my first year students, they always talk about how hard it is to manage time when they're in college. So I think of like those kinds of pressures that students are facing. All of them are college stressors, and I would say they're worse during transition. So that's why we wanted to start off thinking about the transition of first year students. And then at the other part of this, we have protective factors. So we have psychological resources that might protect students, and we have social resources. So you might have certain skills that when you're faced with a stressor, you know how to handle it, and it doesn't become a mental health problem or contribute to mental health problems. But there might be others who lack those skills or lack those supports, where the stressor then takes on this becoming it contributes to worsening mental health, can put it that way. And so in the framework we're thinking about like, what are the types of stressors, and what are the types of psychosocial resources that would help during these times of transitions. And as an economist, and given my other research, I've also just been interested in how these things contribute to academic outcomes. So worsening mental health, that's something that could negatively contribute to your academic outcomes, and college stressors can contribute directly to your academic outcomes. So thinking about this is really useful from a policy perspective, and also for helping to understand how we might think about the challenges students are facing. And then the other thing that I want you to keep in mind is, even though I'm going to focus our attention on college stressors and then the resources that can be protective, the psychosocial resources, which is just a short way of thinking about psychological resources or skills or social supports, we need to keep in mind that the broader context, background, and history all matter. And so I won't be emphasizing that today, but there are contextual factors, there are background factors that can make the effects of stress worse for some students. So it's not always about the supports available, but I want to focus our attention on these psychosocial resources because of the potential ability to change them and the stressors because of the potential ability to affect them as well. Okay, so here's what my research team did to begin to tackle this question. So we were, before the pandemic, in fall 2019, early spring 2020, we worked as a team. So 5 undergrads were on this team. And then Krista Pereira and me to develop a survey. We sent out the survey to all first-year students at UNC Chapel Hill. We first sent it with no incentive and then with a $10 gift card incentive. The response rate was around 30%. Not surprisingly, incentives mattered. It really improved our response rate. And we were asking students about their mental health symptoms, focusing particularly on depression and anxiety symptoms, because these are leading reasons that students seek counseling services. We were asking them about the protective factors, so like the psychosocial support, so we could understand what protective factors we could build to better support students, as I said before, and then like the different sources of stress, so that we could understand whether there are certain sources of stress we should really be focusing on intervening in as a university. The sample we ended up with was about 1,000 students. It was roughly representative of first-year students that year, and probably still roughly representative of first-year students now. I don't think the statistics have changed much. But what I'm going to show you today is just some early results from that. This is my amazing research team that helped put the survey together. All right. So the first thing I just wanted to share was that, this is pre-pandemic data. Just wanted to emphasize that again. But this is the prevalence of depression symptoms and anxiety symptoms in the first-year student population before the pandemic hit. And the threshold of moderate to severe for depression and moderate to severe for anxiety is the threshold that's used for thinking about clinical diagnosis of these 2 types of mental health symptoms. And so what you can see if you add these, so 13.7% had moderate depression symptoms, 4.8% had moderately severe, and 2.5% had severe mental health depression symptoms. So altogether, this is a very large percent of the population, or surprisingly large at that time to me. And then if we look at those with anxiety symptoms, again, that'll be the orange and the green. So the 12.8 plus 6.2%. So we get about 19% with anxiety symptoms, symptoms of generalized anxiety disorder before the pandemic. So that's just one important statistic out there that even before the pandemic, anxiety and depression symptoms were fairly high among first-year students. I'm totally happy to receive thoughts about this in the chat. It could be things that like, I totally am not surprised. Any thoughts about any of these statistics are very much welcome. Okay, let me keep going. And so then the question, so like then we spent a lot of time thinking about what are the different sources of stress that are most important when students are in their first year of college. And so I wanted to hear from you. I can show you where we landed as a research team on this question. But I was going to ask you your thoughts first. So let's see if I can activate this. So if you were to tell me what the biggest source of stress is during the transition to college, you can join the poll by going to pollev.com/fru, or can also enlarge the QR code if you want to use that. Go into presentation mode, but I'll enlarge that again. Yeah, so these are some great ideas. And notice from the poll that you can, if you see one you really agree with, you can like give it a thumbs up so we can get our top ranked ones in there. If you, yeah, new environment, finding a new house, relationships, grades, finances, absolutely. moving away from home, leaving family support systems. Yeah, that was one thing. The family support systems is one thing that was fascinating to me, that when we were looking at pandemic, that there were definitely some students who felt more supported when they went home versus being on campus, which makes sense. Transitioning to a new environment, expectations, finding friends, finding balance, academic change and workload. I think maybe all of us are feeling a little bit of the challenges of workload right now, that time of the semester. Yeah, I see some upping of the family systems is at our top right now. Making friends, career paths, yes. Relationships, great, and finances. All right, so these are all great. And so we were kind of on the same path. So most of the students on my team were towards the end of their time at UNC Chapel Hill. But we worked together to think about, what if we were to think, we wanted to really know the source of stress. And so we were trying to think about what the different categories of stress are that we might want to think about. And surprisingly, there wasn't as much guidance there in the literature for thinking about college student populations as we thought there might be. But here's the categories we came up with. So, and then they match largely what you were showing me as well. So the first category, this is in order of how much students endorse them, because this is the reactions to the survey. We didn't know a priori how this would come out, obviously. But we did, like you, we were thinking about academic stress could be a big challenge, particularly for first-year students. That we thought about future stress, particularly thinking about what you're going to do in the future, or kind of jobs that came up in your examples. I don't know if anyone mentioned appearance stress, but that was one thing that we had understood. We found in other studies and thought we should include. And surprisingly, that is, for me at least, surprisingly, that was one of the big stressors. Stressors around friendship, health, peers, romantic relationships. The way we were describing friendships and peers, peers was like people that you aren't necessarily friends with, and friendships are people that you're close to. And then there was the romantic relationships. And then we had financial stress, family stress, work stress, and stress from chronic illness. And overwhelmingly, we see that all students are struggling with, almost all students, almost 90% report academic stress. And it also, the different colors, so the orange means very much academic stress. And so it's not only the one that's the most overall, but the intensity also seemed to be really strong among our first-year students. Future stress, that was surprising to me that it was next. Appearance and friendships and health and peers and romantic stress. So all these relational things came into play. I was surprised about health stress again. And then financial, family, and work. And thankfully, we don't, the chronic illness. I mean, the fact that 15% of our students are dealing with chronic illness as a sort of source of stress too. Even though that's a small percentage, I think that's an alarming percentage. So it's one to be aware of as well. Were there any questions about that before maybe I'll wait to the end. Yeah, I probably should wait to the end to look at questions, but I was curious thoughts on if anybody has thoughts on this. But at the end, I will try to break it out down by a few different demographics, and the gender breakdown is a lot of fun. So hold on, I'm hoping I'll get there. All right. So then the question was, we have this stressors, and so we're going from the model where we're thinking about what are the stressors. So we know that academic stressors loom large. Maybe there's particular things we can do about that. Maybe there's different things we want to do about financial stressors. But before we get to thinking about the different kinds of stressors, I also wanted to think about this role of psychosocial supports and then show you what I measured again. But first, get your insight into this. So first, I wanted to think about what are the helpful strategies for dealing with stress that you would think about, and what are the not so helpful strategies. And then I'll show you what we found in our data. So if you could bear with me for another poll. getting that QR code up there. Hopefully you can see it. Is it not? It looks like maybe I haven't shared it correctly. Let me so activated it and then I present.
It's there. If folks actually just refresh their
Okay, there
screen
it is.
from the previous question, the new question will pop up.
Okay, great. And then here are people's responses. We got it as a word cloud this time. So these are all helpful strategies for dealing with stress. Exercise is looming large. I totally agree with you. Went on a great run this morning. Friends, time, therapy, wine, journaling. Oh man, these are great ideas. Intimacy, sleep. Yes, sleep becomes a premium this time of year. I think there's something here about friends and family. Yeah, friends are looming large. Puppies, yes. Maybe cats even count too. I don't know. It depends on if you're a cat person. All right. And so, yeah, so wonderful ideas. And let's think about like two of the not so helpful strategies before I share a little bit about what we substances. Procrastination, yeah, bottling. A lot of us have been there with that. Rage, road rage, maybe. Binging, food, yes. Distractions. Netflix is a great distraction, right? Isolation, absolutely. Absolutely. So I love it. You're hitting on a lot of the key factors we were thinking about, and more. I need you on my team too to make sure we cover all our bases. All right, so let me show you what we did. So, and found among these students. So we were thinking about what psychological and social resources we could measure. And so the things that we were measuring are resilience, so your ability to bounce back, resilient coping, your tendency to cope with stress in a highly adaptive manner, so in a way that's beneficial, more beneficial rather than the negative coping strategies we were bringing up in the previous slide. Self-efficacy, so your belief and your capacity to act in ways that are necessary to reach specific goals. I'm happy to take a question, Erin, if you could help me know how to do that. I saw someone had raised their hand.
Yeah, I think what we want to try to do is have folks maybe drop questions in the Q&A.
Okay, yeah, so please, I'd love to hear your question, so please feel free to drop it in the Q&A. And then support from family, friends, and significant others is known to be a really important social resource. Ethnic identity. And then are there other, like, so these are thinking particularly about resources, and you already gave me great ideas, but are there other things that you just think that we should have included there? So we are going to get back to thinking about some of the behaviors you're talking about as well. But when we're thinking about particular skills that help people respond well to stress, were there others that you wished we had included in this survey that come to mind? Feel free to drop into the chat. I'd love to know your thoughts on that. But I'm going to keep going and show what you. Okay. And so those were the things we measured, and I will come back to show you some statistics on those as well. I'm sorry, I lost track of where I was going with this. But the other thing gets back more to the coping strategies that you were talking about. So when I was thinking about this from an economic perspective, often the way we think about the way people make choices, and economists haven't studied mental health as much, but I was thinking about how can questions around mental health be fit into more of an economic framework. And so if you want to just completely tune out for this part and don't want to hear about the economic framework, that's fine. But hopefully this gives us a little lens on things as well. I think it gives us a helpful frame for thinking about people's behaviors. So we model individuals, in this case students, as choosing actions or behaviors. Often we think of them as maximizing some utility or like happiness, and we can think not just of present utility, but future utility. And we think of that being subject to some kind of constraints. And so I think the biggest constraints we think about for college students, and for us in general, will be like time and money. You have a given budget, so you can't afford every Starbucks coffee you'd want, for instance, or you might not have enough time to do all the things that you'd ideally like to do in your day, such as the self-care activities that are really important for promoting your emotional and mental well-being, and also making enough time to do that study. And so we are often faced with these kinds of trade-offs that come through the constraints we face. And I would just add that for one thing that we're very aware of in starting the study is that these constraints are different for different students. So some students come to university with less money, and so then they have to do more work, which makes also the time constraints tighter for them. And it's a feature we've been working on and thinking about with our models. And so, but where we're going with this is that, so individuals are choosing actions, and some of them might matter for mental health and well-being and contribute to their utility. But then the constraints might also be affecting the actions they chose. So like in a perfect world, you might have all the time for sleep that you want, all the time for exercise that you want, time to meditate, and then all the time that you need to study. But then we know that as academics or our students, that as the semester goes on, the time gets tighter and tighter. And so these choices that we would usually make that would make us happier get shoved out by the time constraints. And so we actually have less utility as a result because of these. We're able to achieve less utility because of the strong constraints that we have. And then, yeah, I'll drop the economic model. So then, because we were thinking about this from the perspective of behaviors that individuals are choosing as well, and how we might influence those behaviors, we wanted to share, we wanted to think about the kinds of behaviors you were thinking about that would be supportive of mental health. So how much are students exercising? And how did this vary by moderate to severe depression symptoms or anxiety symptoms? And so here you can see that there were differences in exercise. So this is the number of days exercised by week. Orange is over 3 days. Dark blue is 3 days, and light blue is less than 3 days. And you can see that overwhelmingly that individuals that had moderate to severe anxiety or depression symptoms were less likely to exercise than individuals who did not have moderate to severe anxiety or depression symptoms. I'd also like to point out that even those without moderate to severe anxiety or depression symptoms were still, not even half of them were getting in over 3 days a week, right? So it's something that like time seems to be a really binding factor. We also thought about sleep hours, which was a question that was a thought that was raised. And we found that those with anxiety or depression symptoms, which is the left-hand side here, they were more likely to get less than 7 hours of sleep, where guidance is that we get at least 7 hours of sleep. They were more likely to get less than 7 hours of sleep than those without anxiety or depression symptoms. That could be for a variety of reasons, but it was a difference that we saw. And we also asked about meditation or prayer. So whether individuals with anxiety and depression symptoms had different rates of meditation or prayer. We don't see so much difference in terms of never practice, but we do see that those with no symptoms are more likely to practice very often. So that was one difference we saw. And then we also asked about substance use, which was another question that came up for a negative kind of coping that we might do with stress that might negatively impact our mental health symptoms. We saw among first-year students that 37% engaged in binge drinking. And that we also measured hard drug use, tobacco use, that's the dark blue one, marijuana use, and stimulant use. And so by far, the most it was binge drinking. But it was harder to see differences in this one by anxiety or depression symptoms. So those with moderate to severe anxiety or depression symptoms, that's this light blue bar, were slightly less likely to binge drink. It's a very social activity, so that's our theory there. But they were more likely to use tobacco, more likely to use marijuana, and probably these differences aren't statistically significant, but you do see differences in hard drug use and stimulant use for those with anxiety or depression symptoms. So some of the relationships you would expect to see are there, right? So just to summarize, we had that exercise, our hunch was that that was really protective, might be protective for anxiety or depression symptoms. And we see that those who exercise had that among those with anxiety and depression symptoms, they were exercising less, right? And then similarly, we saw the same thing for sleep. We saw it also for meditation to some extent, and then for substance use, with the exception of binge drinking. We also were really curious about individuals' help-seeking behaviors. So how did those with moderate to severe anxiety or depression symptoms, meaning they could be clinically diagnosed with anxiety or depression, where were they going to get help? And so by need met, that means that we're thinking about those with anxiety or depression symptoms as based on our measures, and seeing what percent actually got help. So this big light blue bar or light blue circle is telling you that 58% did not get help at all. For the dark blue is saying that the 19% got help through UNC resources. So that could have been campus health or CAPS. We also gave them the possibility of going off campus to seek care. The dark blue could also be that they reached out to a professor or administrator for help as well. So it could be informal help. The orange is that their need was met through private care. So they reached out to an outside provider. And then 13% had the need met by both the UNC resources and the private care. But I think the really alarming statistic to me at the time was that 58% of the students with moderate to severe anxiety or depression symptoms, which again is a threshold for clinical diagnosis, were not getting help at all. And this is where I was going to ask you, what do you think are the barriers to help seeking for our college students, particularly for first-year students? So again, I was gonna try to bring this out. Time, yes, that's when I was thinking about, again, coming from the economic model of thinking about constraints, cost. I think even like expectation of cost is a problem, right? Because even if CAPS provides free care, students don't always know about it, and it might not be enough visits that they think they might need. Academic identity, stigma, knowledge, embarrassed, priorities. Yeah, all of these: shame, unaware, different, focus. Yeah, so all these are great, and there's evidence of these different things in the literature. All of these are great ideas. Another thing that I found when I was talking with my first-year students, I was teaching a first-year course and asking questions about mental health as part of the course, and help seeking and trying to problem solve with them about ways that we could address the mental health challenges on our campus. One thing that came up to me, judgment, all these are great ideas. Another thing that came up that I've wondered about as I've tried to work with students to seek help and in that class setting was that there was some sense that they were suffering, but they didn't know if their problems were bad enough that they actually deserved to get help. And that was fascinating to me because and it was something I could identify with too. When do you know that it's bad enough that it's okay to get help? And that could relate to all these things that you're bringing up as well. But I wanted to put that on the table as well because something I heard regularly from my students. All right, and then I said at the beginning that yes, the transition to college may hit some students so much harder than others, and this might be due to many social factors outside their control. We were thinking about how the stressors experienced differed for students coming from different backgrounds, how they might differ by race, ethnicity, by first generation status, where they might have stronger income constraints or less knowledge about how to navigate the university system, gender, and then we also asked about sexual orientation and gender identity. And then because of small sample sizes, lumped them together into sexual or gender minority status. So students who are non-cisgender are students who had a sexual orientation other than heterosexual. And so we looked at all those types of heterogeneity. And then we were also thinking about how the resources to cope with stressors or constraints might differ across these different groups. And I'm not gonna, I'll like drive you crazy if I go through all these statistics. But we do have differences by race, ethnicity that I'd be happy to share with you later. The things, I guess a few things I would just draw out of here is that Black students, even before the pandemic, were struggling more than white students, and also students of mixed race, which is in the other category. And that only got worse during the early stages of the pandemic. We also see that students who are sexual or gender minorities are struggling a lot more with mental health symptoms. And then we also documented different stressors. The question in the chat had been about prevalence of stressors by gender. So I'll throw that one out there, but if you have a favorite breakdown you'd like to see, I'm happy to share that with you, and that could be during the Q&A at the end as well. But when you look at the experience of stressors by gender, what really pops out are two things. One is that women experience in general higher levels of stress in all categories than their male counterparts. The exception is romantic stress, where men experience slightly more romantic stressors, and friendships are kind of on par between the two groups. So in the social context, it seems like maybe men and women are experiencing similar levels of stress, both in terms of friendships and romantic partners. But with the broader set of stressors, we really had higher prevalence among women. Let's see. And then if we look at this, the prevalence of stressors by anxiety or depression symptoms, we can see that those with anxiety and depression symptoms, we wanted to see like those with moderate to severe anxiety or depression symptoms, were there particular stressors that were really dominating for them versus those with no symptoms. And what we see here is family stressors is one that loomed large in terms of differences, chronic illness, financial stressors, friendships, health, and peers. So those were ones where the gap between those with symptoms showed up that their stressors were higher in those different areas than those without symptoms. And then part of all of this was with the hope of thinking about strategies administrators at UNC or the community might use to help deal with, help improve mental health symptoms on campuses. So we were thinking about this again in two ways, is where I started in the talk. So if we know that academics is a dominant stressor, or we know the importance of future stressors for students, how could we help build to support, build better supports around those stressors? So there might be targeted supports to those particular stressors. But there also might be just general resources we might want to build to deal with stress in general. So like, how can we build better resilience in our student population, or better access to counseling and support and things like that? And I created a Google Doc because I was just curious if you could, your thoughts on this, but I'm not sure given the number if it's going to work, but let's give it a try. So my hope was that we could, as a group, brainstorm about what strategies would be most useful for dealing with particular kinds of stressors. So if you're on the document, you see that I've labeled the different kinds of stressors. So like academic stressors, like what do you think the university could do better about that? Or future stressors, what could we do better about that? And then there might be strategies that you'd apply to all stressors, or strategies that help build resources among students. So if anything pops to mind for you, I'd love to hear your thoughts through the Google Doc. And we could also return to this some in the Q&A if you're having a hard time using the Google Doc. But maybe I need to go back and put the link in the chat, don't I?
I was gonna say, if you want to put the Google Doc in the chat,
Yeah,
maybe.
I'm sorry about that.
No, it's okay.
How do I do that? Maybe
Can you
yeah.
copy and paste it in?
Yeah, let me.
Or folks could drop, if you want to type a little bit, folks could. That may be harder.
I'm trying to get there. I'm having trouble because of the drop down from the Zoom. Okay, there. If I do this. All right, and then I can put it in the chat. Sorry about this, guys. All right. Thanks for bearing with me. I forgot an important part of the logistics. All right, so let me know if that's working.
And do you know if is the document able to be edited?
Yeah.
There you go. Okay, cool. Yep, and yeah. Blank. Awesome.
Let's see what I'd love to hear your ideas, and I can share like some of the things that we were thinking about. Did the link? Oh, I sent the link to the host and the panelists. Sorry about that. Thanks, Sarah. Thank you. Yeah, I love the idea of community building events. I wonder, like the person who wrote that, if you have particular examples in mind. I love it. Yeah, tutoring or peer support, I think is great for academics for sure. That's great. Or academic coaching. Yeah, volunteering can be a way to build that social support, or immersive orientations to build community before you start. Yeah, I was hearing when I was talking with my first year students about it, they were talking about orientation and yeah, for academic, like just being willing to talk to professors, I think is really, and that might be like the professor's responsibility, right? Helping students to get the courage up to talk to them during office hours, to start to build those habits. Schedules, time management, yeah. Yeah, I think that was one of the big things that my students really wanted to get more skills around. Future, yes, using career resources. Students get so nervous about like internships and are they doing the right things, and networking, yes, and that's easier for some students than others. And how can we build that to make sure that all students have access to networking, I think is really important. Appearance, yes, thank you. Wear what makes you feel comfortable. Yeah, I wonder about the appearance stress and how much of that's driven by social media. I didn't show you our statistics around social media, but we have another paper looking at how detrimental social media was for college student mental health. So I've wondered about its relationship with appearance, but I don't know the right policy to address that. Dressing for confidence, yeah. All right, so financial, we got more down here. You're amazing. So making college cheaper, absolutely, or providing more scholarships you could put with that, so better financial aid, so students don't have to pay back. Yeah, one thing that we were measuring was food insecurity. I think about 10% of students in our sample struggle with food insecurity. So yeah, support from a food pantry or clothing sharing programs. Work limits on their work hours with employers, more financial aid helps that you don't have to work as much, or the emergency basis. I think the emergency basis really came into play with the COVID-19 pandemic. Our summer funding, I think summer is a big challenge for students, and how do they deal with summers and when they need to get coursework done in the summer, especially if they're struggling during the academic year. So that's a wonderful idea. Health, yes, exercise, yoga, meditation. I love those things. Anxiety medication, getting outside. Yes, especially a beautiful day like this. It's a little dreary, but just feels so fresh and fall-like. And then for all stressors, yeah, making it easier to get university approved absences for health reasons. I think that's been a really overwhelming process since the pandemic, and staying hydrated can be hard, especially when you're drinking as much coffee as I do. In terms of all stressors, talking to people you trust, right? And that's hard in your first year because you're still trying to figure out who those people are that you trust in your new environment, or figuring out a way to incorporate activities in your schedule that makes it easier to deal with them, not build up. Yeah, and some of that seems like related to time management, right? So that you can actually have time to exercise or do things that are refreshing, like spend time with friends. See, having time to rest and knowing that not everyone needs to be focused on one stressor, academic focus. Yeah, that's great. And building the support network, finding those, I think those are great, important resources for all stressors. So thank you. I think I really appreciate all this input. Anything else that I missed that I really just want to make sure I didn't miss anything, because these are all great ideas. And you're right on target with how we were thinking about it. We were thinking that if we could identify these areas of stressors for students, then maybe we could help the university think about which ones would be most supportive for reducing the stressors. And we were thinking that the solution might differ depending on the stressor. And so I love how you saw that with us too. Let me see. So I think I'm almost out of time. So I'm just going to tell you briefly what we did next. So we were thinking about, so after we did this survey, the pandemic hit. It was about March. We had already collected all the baseline survey from these first year students. And that became an opportunity to study the role of stressors and supports in the particular context of the pandemic. So when we go into this period of social isolation or social distancing during wave 2, how did that affect mental health? Or when students returned to campus at wave 3, so we were able to do a survey 18 months out into the pandemic and see what were how stressors had changed and how supports had changed for these students and how that affected mental health symptoms, or how it was associated with mental health symptoms. And then our most recent survey was when these students were ending their 4th year in college. And we followed up yet again to see where they were with their anxiety and depression symptoms, and thinking about reflecting back on how the pandemic had been over those 4 years of college. So it was kind of it was a neat opportunity because we had this population of students who like already had this really challenging first year transition, and then all of a sudden they were faced with this other equally and maybe even more challenging for many of the students transition of like, oh my gosh, it's a pandemic, everything I knew about the world is changing, what do we do with that? And so it was fascinating opportunity to study these challenges in this particular context. This was my amazing team of undergraduates, one grad student again that supported developing the survey. They make me smile when I look back at them. But what I wanted to show you is what happened to depression symptoms. So this is a proportion of students with moderate to severe depression symptoms before the pandemic hit, the first 4 months of the pandemic. So it increased from 25% to almost 30%. So this is was a big increase. It doesn't look statistically significant here because we're only like looking at all the students in the sample, but it was a meaningful and big statistically significant increase. Then what we have is that 18 months into the pandemic, when students are returning to campus, that the percent with moderate to severe depression symptoms returns almost to the pre-pandemic levels. And then by wave 4, it's really close to pre-pandemic levels too. So we have that initial spike during the period of social isolation and the return. For anxiety, we see something a little different. So for anxiety, we see that anxiety symptoms just kept rising, even 18 months into the pandemic during the return to normal. And then by the 4th year, they had leveled off a little bit, but they never returned back to the pre-pandemic levels. And I just want to point out that in interpreting this, even these trends in depression symptoms, we don't know how depression usually evolves over the course of college. So the fact that depression symptoms in the 3rd year return to pre-pandemic levels could be bad if normally depression symptoms are alleviated somewhat as students progress through college. We just don't know that. But I think most alarming and what we found following students over time was this increase in anxiety symptoms. And then what we were able to find is then we looked at like, what were the stressors that were really dominating in terms of affecting these anxiety and are associated with these anxiety and depression symptoms. And the key stressors we found were distance learning and social isolation. So students whose social isolation increased during the pandemic, the early stages of the pandemic, are students who's particularly struggled with distance learning. Those were the ones that suffered most in terms of anxiety and depression symptoms. And finally, I just wanted to show you briefly here another regression result. Don't worry if you don't like to interpret regression results, but let me just tell you the punchline is that along with the stressors, we were thinking about, well, what are the supports that were really helpful for students to make sure their anxiety and symptoms didn't increase, or to protect them from having increases in depression symptoms. And the big factor we found for students across the board was resilience. And so students who had higher resilience, higher change, and were those who were better protected during the pandemic. So that was the key measure we found. And I think I should end there. So that, yeah, it's 3:30. So I'll end there. And I just want to thank my team. So my co-PI, Krista Pereira, my many co-authors, and on different papers that we're writing related to these interesting survey data, and some amazing teams of undergraduates who didn't get to be co-authors, but still made many of those pictures that you saw today. Some of them got to be co-authors, but not all of them, but they've been intricately involved. So I'm just grateful for all that support and thankful to you for your time and participation. I'm very happy to answer any questions now.
Hey, we do have about sort of 5 more minutes scheduled. If there were any closing thoughts, if I didn't want you to feel rushed coming out of the slide deck. So if you had any other sort of
Yeah,
closing thoughts before we jump into Q&A, that's fine, or we can move
yeah,
forward. I
I
just
guess
didn't want you to
that.
I don't want you to be shortchanged on any time.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be happy to, if someone's interested in a particular kind of heterogeneity, I'd be happy to circle back to that in my slides, or but I'm happy to be guided by the Q&A in terms of what would be most useful. And the only other thing I was going to say is that one of my the slide I skipped over was that one of my undergraduates who was involved in the survey also did a great senior honors thesis looking at how anxiety and depression symptoms affected grades. And again, regression results, which you might not want to see, but the basic story was that you try a bunch of different models and throughout you're seeing strong effects of depression and anxiety symptoms on students' GPA. So it's having big effects on their significant effects on their academic outcomes.
Awesome. This was fantastic. We'll
Thank you,
continue
Jen.
to talk. I was sort of, as you were talking and before we transitioned to some Q&A, we didn't plan this, but I in my role spend a lot of time talking to the families of incoming students, specifically about transition to college. And so much of what you talked about comes through in both the presentation that I deliver, but also the Q&A and conversations that we get with parents. So I'm actually really, I've already made my notes like follow up with Jane to incorporate information into first year presentations. So
Yeah.
this is really fantastic. I think there's some questions in the Q&A. And so maybe we can go over to those first, and then we can sort of talk about some other things. So one question says, would it be helpful to see the data? And I know you went through a couple of these slides and went specifically to gender, but this one talked about it'd be helpful to see the data more closely by race. One particular slide showed a much higher prevalence of depression amongst the other category for race, as well as amongst Black and Hispanic Latinx students.
Yeah, I was flying through that, but yeah, I was really fascinated by the differences by race, ethnicity, and yes, we see here. So 18, and you got to remember the UNC Chapel Hill sample is predominantly white, right? So when we get to Black students, it's about 6% of our sample, Hispanics about 7%, and other mixed race, which could be other non-white students or mixed race students, it's at least half mixed race students, is about 6 or 7% of our sample. And this is showing the percent of students with moderate to severe anxiety symptoms among these different racial ethnic groups. And this one is showing the percent of students with moderate to severe depression symptoms. And again, we use that slush threshold because it's the threshold for clinical diagnosis. But you're absolutely right. What we see is the higher rates for Black students and for other mixed race students. And then I don't know if I included here, we also did a lot of work to look at disparities during the pandemic. And I don't think I was worried about time, so I didn't include that here. But what we saw was that depression symptoms in particular for Black students really skyrocketed 4 months into the pandemic. And you have to remember that I think it went up to almost 60%, if I remember correctly, which is a shocking statistic. And you have to remember that was also 4 months into the pandemic was fairly soon after the killing of George Floyd. And so that was also going on for Black students at that stage. And so it was a particularly challenging time for them. And then we also saw that mental health symptoms increased more for Asian students who were, a lot of them were stuck in, it's for different reasons, right? But at least I know among my graduate students that it was a particularly challenging time for students who couldn't go back to their home countries. And but they had all different sorts of challenges. And I could just show you briefly differences by race ethnicity for stressors experienced in the first year pre-pandemic. And you can see that for Black students, stressors that, really stand out are relative to other groups are chronic illness, family, financial, and work to some extent. But you can also see that Hispanic students also report a lot of work stress. Any other questions about that? Because I'm happy to.
We'll see if folks drop some additional questions in specifically on that topic. I was wondering if you could, we talked about this sort of notion of, and you shared the statistic of more than 50% of students not seeking help, right? Unmet need in terms of help seeking.
Mhm.
And then we talked a little bit about sort of this, is it bad enough? Right? Is it bad enough? And so I'm wondering if you have thoughts, or if you and your students and fellow researchers spent any time sort of thinking about what advice you would give students who are asking that question, like, is it bad enough? When when is time to go and
Yeah.
seek out help? And I'm wondering if you all spent some time talking about that, and uh, what if any advice you might offer folks who have those thoughts.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd love to hear thoughts from other people as well. I'm trying to get back to that slide so people could see that one. But sorry, probably, yeah, here's the one about help seeking. The way I would put it to students is that if it is significantly impeding your ability to engage in activities you would usually engage in, or you just don't know who to go to, like that's a sign that you need help and you just need to go somewhere, right? But that it's yeah, that's the best I've come up with. And I've actually physically walked students to CAPS just to try to help them get over that barrier, because I think it can be so intimidating, especially for first year students, just to walk into the door of CAPS, and having to do that alone, I think is really hard. But I'd love to hear anybody's thoughts on that, because I'm not sure I have the best answer. I see something popping in the chat, maybe.
Amy has raised their hand, but Amy, if you
Yeah.
will put your question in the chat or in the Q&A, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Maybe while we're waiting for that question, sort of along those lines, I mean, one of the things I was thinking about as you were talking is, as an economist, a lot of what we are talking about is sort of opting into help,
Right.
right? Like help seeking, right? Even that language, right? That it is incumbent upon the individual to help seek. But
Right.
a lot of economists, uh, I'll, I'll share my limited knowledge of economics, okay, which might be mostly informed by like Freakonomics or something like that,
Which is
right?
great. That's
Which is
great.
great. Talk about this sort of like, well, maybe that needs to be opt out, right?
Mhm.
Are there things I've been a part of some conversations around career services, for example, right? And should career development and career support be an opt-out approach, right? That if you
Yeah.
don't want it, cool, you can indicate that, but we're going to offer that in some way at a population level. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are as an economist about sort of how we structure help seeking, and whether or not economics might suggest different ways to approach that notion just more broadly.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I love that lens on it, because there is that cost to just going through the door, right? So that if it's just offered and you opt out, then I totally agree with you, Erin, that could be a great way to bolster help seeking. I think another thing that comes into the economic framework a lot, and that one would completely fit within existing behavioral economic framework. So another one is about information, and particularly that even, and this came up with my first year students as well, is that if you can target the information to students' needs, then they might be more likely to respond. And so the way you share the information could be incredibly helpful. And one of the suggestions among and there have been economic studies looking at how you share the information and targeting. And so that's kind of a finding out there. But then what came out from talking with my first year students was this sense that, wouldn't it be amazing if we could think of a way that orientation could actually target offerings to students based on their needs or their interests, so that they wouldn't have to go through pages and pages and pages. Like, I could go here, I could go here, I could go here for support, but actually had some targeting. And I was at a conference, behavioral health convening, and I know that ECU, I think, had a successful intervention where they sent letters out from the dean of students to students who had mental health symptoms at the beginning of the first year, just saying, not even telling them that they knew they had mental health symptoms, but just telling them, if my memory is correct, that, hey, we're here. If you need help, feel free to reach out to us. And that sort of targeted approach of reaching out also was highly effective. So I think there's a lot of room around information as well and how we reach out. But I love your idea about opting out.
I'm also wondering if you or your team talked at all about sort of peer-to-peer support, right? Because we talked again
Right.
about like help seeking, like your resilience or your ability to seek help or resources. But I'm wondering if you all talked about like how communities or peers can
Yeah.
best support one another when individuals may have barriers or challenges to individual help seeking.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, especially when you think about the students living away from home. And I don't think it's something we adequately dealt with. I know, yeah, I was thinking about the time a couple of years ago when I was teaching my first year seminar, and there'd been all these mental health challenges on campus, and students were talking about how they were being called on in ways they never expected to have to support other students, and feeling really overwhelmed by that. And I think that peer support is so important. And yet, how do you build it in a way that keeps the students from getting overwhelmed by the challenges they're finding among their peers? But follow-up ways, we did try to collect information about peer-to-peer support as well, and just haven't looked at it. But I think it's such an important point.
Thanks. That's great. This is a little bit of a sidebar, but we were asked if you are willing to share your work email if folks are interested in reaching out to you about your work and things.
Yeah, I could
So
put
we
that
can,
in the chat. I'd love to hear. I'd love to hear from anyone. Um, I'm going to make sure to send it to everyone and not the host and panelists like I did last
right.
time.
Again, we were talking at the beginning about like sort of Zoom, right? And like, oh, we should be there by now, but we all are still, still seems a little bit
Yeah,
not typical. Um,
yeah,
uh, you know, this study and this work specifically focused on sort of students in transition, right? And first year students. How did you all think about what a period of transition is,
mm,
right? So I work in student affairs at the university. We spend a lot of time talking about like the first 6 to 8 weeks. But is that the right, do you think that's the right time frame to think about a period of transition to
yeah,
college, or should we be thinking about that in different kinds of ways? And when does that period of transition start?
yeah. I would at least like to extend that notion to the end of the first semester, because I feel like getting that whole semester under a student's, to have experienced the whole semester and kind of the intense exam periods, which would include finals, right, which is a different level of intensity, is really important before students can really think to have transitioned to university. So I would argue at least for a semester. We see, if you look at a frequency basis, you see definitely spikes in stress at different times over the line of the semester. And so even just understanding what that looks like and how to get support at those different times, it would take at least a semester to figure out, right? And maybe two, because the style of classes you take changes. Yeah. Does that seem fair?
Yeah, and I think there's not a answer, right?
No, absolutely
I've got a
not.
phone ringing in the deep background, so
Yeah.
just ignore that. Yeah, I mean, we talk about, first year experience, and even many campuses in Carolina is similar. A second year student experience, because oftentimes we see students transition to college traditionally age first year. Undergraduate students might transition, have a first year experience, and then the second year creates new and different stressors and experiences, and then
Yeah.
uh, even fourth year students, and what that next transition looks
Right.
like.
Because each
Um,
year has like a new challenge associated with it, right? By the second year, you're feeling all this pressure to determine what your major is going to be at a higher intensity than your previous year. Did you choose the right major? You're living in a different place. You have less of the supports that first years have. And then by your fourth year, you're trying to find a career, which is a whole new thing. And finish up, maybe write a senior honors thesis for some of the students. No, I'd agree with you. I think each year has its important transitions. Really good question.
yeah, we spend a lot of time, my colleagues and I, and with students, sort of talking about it. And this research really hones in on this idea that um, COVID both revealed and exacerbated things that
Mm-hmm.
were already happening before COVID. And so thinking about that environment before COVID, I use the term sort of, we live in a culture, in a society where it's hard to feel connected, rooted. I think we see in the literature that many, particularly young people, don't trust, arguably for good reason, institutions in the way that maybe previous generations trusted uh,
Mm-hmm.
institutions, whether that's a healthcare institution or college and university, or political institutions, right? And so I think we spend a lot of time talking about resilience, but we don't often spend a lot of time talking about sort of the broader societal
Mm-hmm.
support systems. Uh, I'll age myself. I used to be able to turn on the TV, and get three channels of news, and they were more or less trusted, quote unquote, trusted sources of news, and that's just totally different, right, in terms of
Right.
how people receive information. So, another, I mean, you all may have talked about this, but just sort of the broader social environment that we live in, and
Right.
how that contributes to stressors and anxiety. And these things were in place pre-pandemic, right?
Right.
And that pandemic just revealed and exacerbated many of
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the things that it's a great point. One thing I can show you that we were interested in towards the end in terms of like the intersection with pandemic effects. And again, this is regression results, but I'll explain them to you. We were looking at things that were associated with depression symptoms. We first looked at the overall population, so stressors and supports, but then we said, what about those with moderate to severe depression symptoms before pandemic, or those who did not have moderate to severe depression symptoms before the pandemic? Were their experiences different in terms of what mattered for depression symptoms? And what we saw was that those who didn't have depression symptoms before the pandemic were those who were particularly affected by stressors, so particularly like the distance learning and COVID-19 stress. And those who did have symptoms before the pandemic weren't so affected by these stressors, but were particularly negatively impacted by, so families are not negatively impacted. Family support was a really big protective factor for those with depression symptoms. And resilience, like I said before, worked for everyone. And then we also did the same thing for anxiety symptoms, so that we saw that those that did not have anxiety symptoms pre-pandemic were particularly affected by challenges with distance learning, not so much for those with anxiety symptoms pre-pandemic, but then those with without anxiety symptoms. Across both groups, again, we saw that resilience mattered. So the stressors seemed to be more lead to bigger changes for those without symptoms, which I thought was pretty fascinating.
Absolutely. we've got about maybe 4 or 5 minutes left, and so I'd love to encourage our audience to drop any final questions for Dr. Firth in the Q&A, or certainly use the chat if that's easier.
Yeah.
And if there's not, I might just ask you if you have, kind of for you, if there are maybe 1 or 3 kind of key takeaways, as you either look back or look forward, right, to new areas for research or things that you're interested in. What kind of questions came out of this work for you that
Oh,
you're interested in
absolutely.
exploring next?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm really interested in digging into more like the academic challenges and what we can, because I'm, as an economist of education, I'm really interested in what are the academic challenges that are particularly contributing to mental health, and what are things instructors can do to be more supportive of mental health. Are there ways that we can like set up the course, for instance, that are helpful? Or if we're not going to change how difficult a course is, what are the resiliencies we need to build among students, or the protective factors that can keep the difficulty of the course from contributing to mental health symptoms? So I've been really excited and delving into that issue more. And I've been working with the system office because one of the factors that was so meaningful was resilience, and I've been working with the system office to measure the impact of the Penn Resilience program that they rolled out on several campuses, to see how that's going to affect student resilience. So I'm really excited about areas that programs we can create to build resilience among students, and how to measure that and improve that. I could keep going, but I don't want
Yeah,
to.
it sounds exciting, and it sounds like there's a lot to explore,
Yeah, and
which
I
is
just
not surprising.
yeah, and it's just, I think I'm working towards making stronger connections with academic outcomes. So how mental health symptoms affects persistence and GPA and success in college, because I feel like, in terms of part of my value as an economist in speaking to these issues, is that I can really push home some cost benefit sort of analysis. So what are the benefits in terms of putting a monetary value on it? And so linking it to academic outcomes can begin to put a monetary value that could be really meaningful as we try to determine how much resources to put into different kinds of programs. So that's one way that I hope I can build as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much. I really hope our audience took as much from this as I did. I've had the opportunity to participate in several of our mental health. I call them sort of mental health and seminars over the last couple of years, and just as you were talking, hearing all the ways that all of these seminars have really tied together. And this one for me was a really comprehensive look at a really important uh, time period for our students as they come to college and transition, whatever that means to you, right? So this was really great. Another sort of key takeaway I think for me was, particularly when folks were filling out the Google Doc,
Mm,
about half of them were things that are what I would call sort of university actions, right? Or
right.
university administrative strategies, you might call them. But really, half of them were kind of what I'll call like either individual or group actions, so not necessarily things that the university would control or initiate. But so many of them were opportunities for partnership, right, and
Mhm.
working together. And I see that the Heals Care Network slide is up, which is a perfect, right, like perfect slide for this comment, because I think that's what the Heals Care Network is all about. It's about bringing together both student-driven, faculty, staff, administrative, university resources into one place. And I heard in what you were talking about and what you and your team found is there's so many opportunities to partner and work together to address these challenges, that it's not just up to an individual student to help seek, that there are a lot of ways that we can collectively and collaboratively impact the environment,
Yeah.
which actually from an economic standpoint, I think is often yields much stronger results than relying on individuals to take action.
Yeah, that's a great point, Aaron. And I just appreciate so much the work you're doing in this space and others there.
Well, you too. Thanks so much. So we're gonna transition to just a few sort of closing remarks and some information. So the Heals Care Network, if you're not familiar, we would hope you are, but would love and encourage folks to spend some time at care.unc.edu. It's a wonderful resource and site for all things related to help and resources and both help seeking, but also contributing, right? There are so many resources on campus that give students in particular, but faculty and staff as well, an opportunity to be a positive impact in helping Carolina students have a good experience here. So encourage folks to check that out. I know there were some questions, and I think I should have prompted this at the front end so that I could share the slide at the back end, but good questions in the chat about CLE, a Campus Life Experience credit. So if you are seeking Campus Life Experience credit, you can either go to the URL on the slide that you see or use the QR code there. And if you have questions, just send an email to care.unc.edu and we can answer any of those as it relates to CLE credit. And we want to share some information with you about some upcoming seminars. So as I indicated, this is a part of a series of seminars, webinars that we've been doing now for a couple of years. And some upcoming mental health seminars are Mental Health and Nutrition on February 6th from 12 to 1:30, Mental Health and Financial Wellness on March 20th from 1 to 2:30. You can find out more details on the care.unc.edu website. And I know there will be an April program as well. So lots of opportunities in the spring semester to continue these really important conversations. And again, I'm really looking forward to those as they come around. Before we wrap up, I want to extend a very special appreciation to Dr. Brewer for spending your time with us today. It's just really what university is supposed to be about in terms of both generating new knowledge and then using that new knowledge to inform practice and make the world a better place. And this is a great example of that. And so we really appreciate you and your team and your giving of your time and your sharing of your knowledge and resources. It's been really appreciated.
Thanks, Aaron.
Yeah, and I also want to thank Sarah Stallman and Jesus Enriquez. They have been sort of behind the scenes, and this wouldn't have happened without Jesus and Sarah's work to make this event happen. So want to extend a special appreciation to them for their hard work to make this webinar happen, from marketing and advertising to technology and all the sort of what I'll call back of the house work that goes into making these events happen. Thanks everyone for being here today. This was such an important conversation and a continued conversation. We hope you take this information, explore additional resources, check out care.unc.edu. We hope everybody, as you enter this time of the semester, which I know can bring about a lot of different feelings, right? This can be a joyous time of the year for many, but it can also be a particularly challenging time of the year for many. And so we hope you take care and are well, and we appreciate you being with us today.
Thanks again.